Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining today's informational webinar on the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency's Violence Intervention and Prevention Grants Evaluation Initiative funding announcement. My name is Sam Cook, and I serve as PCCD's Director of Policy and Planning, and I'm also joined today by several other PCCD team members who will be supporting our webinar today, including members of our program and fiscal staff. So I'll let them introduce themselves briefly at this time. And I'll start by asking my colleague Chris to say hello and a little bit about himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Epica. I'm Deputy Director in our Office of Financial Management and Administration. I'm going to ask Heather to go next.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Chris. This is Heather Hewitt. I am the Executive Assistant in our Executive Office here at PCCD. And I will turn it over to Zoe.
Great, thanks, Heather. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Zoe Miner, and I'm a program analyst in the Office of Research Evaluation and Strategic Policy Development. I think we have one more that I can see, Jen, to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Eli, and I am also a program analyst in the Office of Research Evaluation and Strategic Policy Development.
All right, thanks everyone. So let's go ahead and cover a couple of housekeeping rules and just a few reminders. So this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on PCCD's Gun Violence Grants and Funding webpage as soon as it becomes available. We'll also send out a notice that recording link is live. We encourage you to please check your audio settings just to make sure you're able to clearly hear today's presentation using your computer or other device. Please note that we cannot hear you. However, you will be able to submit questions through the Q&A feature in the live event platform. Please rest assured that questions submitted through this feature will not be visible immediately to all participants. However, it will be reviewed by PCCD staff, and we've allotted about 15 minutes or so at the end of the webinar, depending on how many questions come in, just to answer and respond to questions you've submitted through that feature. To the extent possible, any questions that we're not able to address fully today during the webinar will be answered on the Q&A section of PCCD's website. We'll also make sure that a copy of PowerPoint slides from today's session are posted online and again shared with you all after the session. So moving forward towards the rest of our agenda, we'll be providing a brief overview of PCCD and then provide a sort of roadmap of the VIP Grants Evaluation Funding announcement that was recently opened by PCCD. That'll include an overview of the grant program's goals, eligibility, activities that are allowable, as well as funding priorities. And we'll also go through some of the application process and timeline for requesting funds through the grant program, including walking through steps that applicants will need to take in order to submit and develop a proposal within the Egrants system. And finally, as noted, if you have any questions as we're going through any of that content, please again encourage you to use that Q&A feature to ask us anything that you want clarification on. And without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive right in. So we wanted to provide an overview of PCCD for folks who may be less familiar with our agency. So our acronym PCCD stands for the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. Our agency was established in 1978 through Pennsylvania state law and serves as the Commonwealth's Justice Planning and Policymaking Agency. Our mission is to enhance the quality, coordination, and planning within the criminal and juvenile justice systems, to facilitate the delivery of services to victims of crime, and to increase the safety of our communities. We are a relatively small but growing state agency housed within the executive office. We're approaching about 150 employees working across 4 offices. We're directed by an overarching commission, which is advised by 7 different advisory committees and 2 training boards. So as you can see on this slide, PCCD's responsibilities and programs fall into a number of different areas, including funding and grants, technical assistance, data and research, victims compensation, victim services, and training, among other responsibilities. If you're interested in learning more about these areas, would highly encourage you to check out our website at www.pccd.pa.gov. So we have covered a little bit about what our agency does, what we're responsible for. Wanted to talk a little bit about PCCD's agency priorities, and just note that providing support for effective community-led gun violence prevention efforts is one of PCCD's top strategic priorities as identified in our 2021-2025 strategic framework. We're also a long-time investor in strategies that increase effectiveness of interagency planning and collaboration focused on preventing crime and increasing public safety, as well as an investor in data research and other practices that inform investments and policy decisions across the Commonwealth and at a local level. So in recent years, PCCD has made numerous investments to support local community violence intervention strategies through our Violence Intervention and Prevention Grant Program, our Gun Violence Reduction Grant Program, and many other funding streams. And many of those programs are really designed to align with recommendations that were identified by the Special Counsel on Gun Violence and are responsive to the evolving needs of local communities. We'd encourage you to learn more about PCCD's past and current investments in these efforts, both through the Violence Intervention and Prevention and Gun Violence Reduction Grant Programs, among other initiatives, by visiting PCCD's gun violence webpage and checking out the interactive gun violence and VIP grantees data dashboard, as well as our archived program pages online. So now that you know a little bit more about who we are, we'll move over to the grant program that you are interested in learning more about, which is the VIP Grants Evaluation Initiative solicitation. So first, just a little bit of background. On July 8th of last year, the state budget was passed into law. Among its provisions, it included a total of $105 million in both federal and state funds allocated to PCCD for violence intervention and prevention, or VIP grants and technical assistance. So in response to those new resources, PCCD staff and members of the School Safety and Security Committee, which is responsible for overseeing the administration of VIP funds, they developed and adopted a VIP solicitation framework that utilized a multi-pronged approach to the administration of these new dollars. The plan, which the committee approved in late August, involved using a portion, about $3 million of that total appropriation, for a new VIP grants evaluation initiative. So on January 11th, 2023, the School Safety and Security Committee approved a more detailed funding framework for this initiative, and PCCD announced the availability of $3 million in funding to support the initiative shortly thereafter on January 17th. As the program's title would suggest, the primary purpose of this initiative is really to determine early outcomes and short-term impacts of PCCD's investments through the VIP grants program. These efforts will complement other VIP initiatives that are supported by PCCD this fiscal year, and that includes projects that were recently approved by the School Safety and Security Committee for VIP competitive grants, as well as the Coordinated Community Violence Intervention Strategies Pilot Grants Program. And it'll also be closely working with the VIP Technical Assistance and Training Initiative, which is led by WestEd in partnership with LISC, really to augment supports and resources for grassroots organizations and others who are working in the community violence intervention and gun violence prevention space in Pennsylvania. So this slide is sort of a funding announcement 101. You can see that it provides an overview of eligible applicants, project period, and budget. Worth noting, and you'll hear it quite often throughout the presentation, that this presentation kind of provides high-level insights around the funding announcement. We'd always encourage you to carefully review the written funding announcement and make sure that you take a look at all of the information that's presented there. But just at a high level, in terms of eligible applicants under this solicitation, nonprofit organizations, institutions of higher education, municipalities, counties, and district attorney offices are all eligible to apply under this solicitation. Those eligible applicants are actually sourced through statute, so it's tied to who can come in for VIP funds globally. But wanted to really make note, and you can see it emphasized here on the slide, really want to make sure folks are aware that this is a statewide project. So the goal of the Grants Evaluation Initiative is really to take a look at projects statewide and to take on research and evaluation activities for a broad cohort of projects. The project period, as you can see in that middle area, will be 24 months or 2 years. The project start and end dates, we expect the project to run from July 1 of this year through June 30th of 2025. And in the last area, you can see a little bit about some of the budget, and cost details over there. We'll get into some of this a little bit further down the road, but as I mentioned before, a total of $3 million is being announced under the solicitation. You are allowed to come in for indirect and administrative costs. However, we strongly ask that that be kept to a minimum. You can come in for federally allowable indirect rate or a de minimis 10% rate. There is no match requirement for these funds. And because this is structured as a cooperative agreement, and just because in general, we reserve the right to determine final budgets, just note that we will be actively working with an approved applicant on program structure, budget, all that good stuff upon selection and onboarding. So that's sort of the nuts and bolts of kind of the logistics of the funding announcement. We wanted to get into kind of the purpose and the goals and objectives of this solicitation as well. So as I mentioned before, the VIP grants evaluation funding announcement, this is going to support a brand new initiative, and it's really developed to support a comprehensive data analysis as well as an independent and rigorous evaluation of a subset of the projects that have been funded by VIP, with a goal of determining outcomes and short-term impacts of PCCD's investments. So we recognize that in the community violence intervention and gun violence prevention space, it's work that takes a long time to realize the fruits of that labor. However, we're really interested in understanding two primary objectives through this research initiative. And the first is to look at things from an implementation lens, so analyzing and documenting successes, what went well, maybe what didn't go so well, and lessons learned from early cohorts of VIP grantees. And that would include an evaluation of whether program and project specific goals were achieved. So this is a relatively new grant program for our agency, and we're really interested in understanding kind of how that early implementation has looked for at least a subset of some of those projects supported through the grant program. And then the second area and objective is around capturing site-specific and cross-site outcomes for all 5 of the pilot sites that were recently awarded through the fiscal year 2022 Coordinated Community Violence Intervention Strategies Pilot Grant Program. So the expectation here would be that a selected applicant would work closely with all 5 of those project sites to really dig in on their activities and conduct an evaluation. So that's the sort of big picture of what we're hoping to accomplish with this funding announcement. And I should just note on the outset, we're really excited and appreciative to be able to provide funding to support research and evaluation, particularly for this grant program. We think it's really important, and oftentimes, it's something that, funding doesn't always materialize for kind of the evaluation piece. So we're really excited about this initiative. We have a couple of key deliverables that we're looking for a recommended applicant to be able and ready to meet and accomplish as part of this cooperative agreement. So you can see there at the top, just kind of reiterating that the way that this grant would be structured, it really would involve a close working relationship between our staff at PCCD as well as our partners, and specifically our VIP training and technical assistance provider at WestEd, really as part of almost all, if not all of these deliverables listed below. And so, in order of what you see on this slide, those deliverables include assessing, again, a subset of VIP grantees' implementation of program activities, that process evaluation that I mentioned before. We say subset because in total, VIP grants have either been awarded or approved to upwards of 180, 190 projects. So that's a really large cohort. And so we recognize that to do that evaluation work well, it likely makes sense to have that occur within a subset of those grantees, leaving it a bit to the discretion of the applicant to kind of spell out how they'd like to approach selecting and identifying that subset. But again, something we'll work closely with a recommended applicant to kind of figure out the details on. As I mentioned before, the expectation would be to evaluate all 5, so 100% of our coordinated CVI strategies pilot program sites, conducting site visits and virtual meetings to interview key staff, stakeholders, and community partners, analyzing quarterly program reports that have been submitted by grantees, including performance data, coding the specific activities conducted by grantees to achieve program and project goals. For instance, understanding how many grant projects involve things like referrals or mentoring or specific types of programming activities. We'd also expect a selected applicant to review any other documents, program records, or materials as needed. And then in terms of some deliverables, we're expecting the selected applicant to produce 2 research reports over the course of the project, an interim and a final report. And then last but certainly not least, we'd expect that somebody in this role would present their findings to PCCD, members of the School Safety and Security Committee, and other key stakeholders, and really looking for that presentation, as well as the report language, to really be able to be translated for a non-academic lay audience, in addition to being well vetted by researchers. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the research report, since that's a major deliverable for this funding announcement and this initiative. So I mentioned that an approved applicant would be expected to produce 2 research reports over the course of the project, both an interim and final report. We're expecting that those reports will touch on a couple of major areas that you can see identified on this slide. So the first is around documenting implementation efforts of VIP grantees to again capture those areas of strength, areas where things maybe went a little sideways, and really emphasizing kind of the lessons learned for future programming and grant making efforts. We'd also like a report to focus on kind of how PCCD's investments through VIP have or have not yielded their intended impacts. And we're also looking to determine whether any strategies or programs that were supported through early VIP cohorts were more effective than others in meeting goals and objectives, and why that might be. And then we'd also like the report to address any necessary adjustments to future VIP funding announcements based on all of those collective findings. And of course, we'd imagine that there might be some additional things that report will cover, but these are kind of the high level areas that we'd like an applicant who's selected to be able to address. So some other expectations and deliverables that we wanted to cover with the group today. So as you can see on this slide, we're expecting that applicants will be able to demonstrate both within their application as well as within their deliverables, if they're selected, how proposed evaluations would build upon existing research related to community violence intervention, how their evaluation approach would support the development or enhancement of community violence intervention and prevention programs, policies, and practices, and that those efforts would also identify what elements within or outside of specific programs design or implementation contributed to successes or challenges and failures. So that question that I referenced earlier on the last slide about kind of understanding if some programs worked better than others, well, why was that? What were some of the underlying factors, maybe within as well as potentially outside of the control of those grantee organizations? And then another key area that we're expecting applicants to be able to do and achieve is to address the external validity of the proposed evaluation approach, including how findings may be generalizable to other jurisdictions or populations. So continuing on with the expectations and deliverables theme, grantees are also expected to keep track of and report on project activities and related expenditures via quarterly program and fiscal reports in eGrants. This is a pretty standard expectation for any of our grantees, and it's no exception for this initiative. In addition, we'd expect that a selected applicant would participate in onboarding activities and other grant-related activities, for instance, monitoring. And any entity receiving funding under this program would be expected to submit all data sets that result from the project to our statistical analysis center, along with any files or documentation that would be necessary to reproduce the project's findings by other parties down the road if necessary. So in terms of program activities and expenses, kind of the what can you spend money on and what can't you spend money on, theme. So you can see this slide kind of parses it out into eligible or ineligible or limited cost categories. So on the eligible side, these are pretty standard cost categories for any budget that we offer for grant programs at PCCD. It includes things like salary and benefits for personnel, whether full or part-time, contractors and consultants, supplies and equipment, training, travel, and transportation expenses. Again, those indirect costs that don't exceed federally approved rates or a de minimis rate, and then any other expenses that are directly related to the conduct, management, and coordination of the project. On the right-hand side with the ineligible or limited, again, these are pretty standard fare in terms of things that we won't allow grantees to spend money on. They include things like construction, land acquisition, lobbying, and political contributions, honoraria or bonuses, food and refreshments, funding personnel that are not deemed to be, that should say integral, apologies, to the program's implementation, as well as any indirect costs that exceed that federally approved or de minimis rate. And just a note again, PCCD in general reserves the right to have approved applicants remove items from the proposed project that are deemed ineligible, and funds can't be used for costs that are incurred prior to the official start date of the award. And again, since this is a cooperative agreement, you can expect, if you're recommended, to work quite closely with both our fiscal and program staff on finalizing and working through that process upon onboarding. Okay, so we've covered the funding announcement, sort of what's allowed, what's expected, all that good stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the application process. So for this funding announcement, as with most of our funding announcements at PCCD, your application has to be submitted through PCCD's eGrant system. And a final recommendation of a project will be made following the receipt and review of applications in eGrants. A reminder that the deadline to submit your application for this funding announcement in eGrants is Thursday, March 30th, 2023 by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Do not wait until midnight. It will close you out. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to the lovely Heather Hewitt, who's going to explain how to get started in eGrants if you've never had the privilege of using that system before, as well as some other tips and tricks that we've found to be helpful to convey to applicants as they start on their journey. So Heather, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sam. All right, so as Sam said, we want to get you started in eGrants. The first step would be to create an eGrants account. There is a link to a guide getting started in eGrants on our webpage, as well as the Keystone Login Guide, which is a huge, I shouldn't say huge, it's a great tool to use to walk you through getting registered. There's a couple of different ways that I think we'll get into here. Your second step is to register your organization with eGrants. And then the third step is to request user roles in eGrants to make sure that you have the right users and permissions set up in eGrants to be able to work on your application. Next slide. Thank you. So agency registration, there is a request form that is linked on this page, and it can also be found on our PCCD website under the eGrants tab. Your agency must be properly registered in eGrants if you intend to apply for a grant. And you will note, you'll see this on the form. Authorized officials are people with contract signing authority, which are generally the executive director or head administrator of the agency. Again, that's on the form. And then you can complete, once this form is complete, you can send that to the email address that is listed on the screen. We mentioned user roles. Every user is able to have up to 6 unique roles, which are listed out here on the screen. Financial creator, financial reader, program creator, program reader, submission, and user manager. The creator roles, program and financial creator, they can view and create information, manage program section information, reports, budget section, depending on if it's financial or program. The reader roles can do just that. They can read only, kind of like a Word document that you can only look at. You can't make any changes to. So if you are someone who maybe the final application needs to go through an executive director or someone higher up in the organization, they could have this reader role just to kind of do a once over before it is submitted. The submission role will allow you to actually submit grant forms, applications, modifications, continuations, and then the user manager manages the roles for the agency. They will still need the other roles, or 1 or 5 of the other roles, depending on what they're doing, to actually work on the application. And please note, this is huge. A lot of people overlook this, but every agency must register 2 users in order to complete their application. We do need to have 2 separate users registered and associated with the organization in order to move forward with the application. And again, every agency should have an agency user manager role. The user manager approves requests and maintains existing security for users already established within the agency. There is a user manager help guide, which is on this page as well as on the Egrants page of our website. But just keep that in mind. And you can have more than 1 user manager per organization. The minimum, you just have to have at least 1. And if you do need assistance, the Egrants Help Desk is available Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. We are not available on weekends or holidays that fall during the week. The email address and the phone number are here on the screen, as well as some other useful resources, getting started in eGrants, applicant resources, and the grant application walkthrough. These links are very, very useful to walk through every part of the application. So I definitely would recommend checking those out. And I think that's it for me. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks, Heather. I appreciate it. And again, a reminder, we'll send out these slides. So if you're like, where do those links go to? They're apparently very helpful, and they are. Don't worry, we'll send out the slides and you can peruse to your heart's content. So now that we have gotten that primer on getting into the eGrant system, and for some of you, maybe you've done that before and you're a pro, let's talk about what's actually included in this specific application. And some of this will look pretty familiar if you've applied for a PCCD grant before, but some of them are unique to this funding announcement. So the first is an executive summary. That's a pretty standard section. We're asking that all applicants fill out the script that's available in that application and just paste it into the appropriate section. It is called executive summary for a reason. Please keep it brief, just a couple of sentences or so. This is what we use to actually summarize your project when it's going to folks for recommendation, such as our committee. And it's also what we use if we get asked about the project from other stakeholders. So short and sweet, name of the game. The application overview section, this is where you'll provide an overview of the organization, your mission statement, link up to the applicant eligibility criteria in the funding announcement. And this is also where you would describe any proposed partners who would be helping you out as part of the planned program design. This is also the section where you would describe your experience, qualifications, capabilities, listing out any key staff, any proposed project partners, just really basically outlining the case for your abilities to implement and manage the proposed project. And that'll specifically include in that section addressing your experience and capacity to work with proposed data sources. So basically your experience conducting or conducting similar research or evaluation efforts, your experience and capacity to design and implement rigorous independent evaluation and research projects, as well as your experience implementing projects of a similar scope, design, and magnitude. So that's the applicant overview, capabilities and competencies section. The next section in the application is the statement of problems. So this is where we're asking applicants to address the need for research. We talked about the expectations earlier on about how we're looking for applicants to be able to connect their proposed efforts to sort of the existing literature and research based on community violence intervention. And to that end, we're asking applicants to also provide a brief literature review within this section of the application. The next section is project design and implementation, really important section. They're arguably all important, but this is really the nuts and bolts of your project and your proposal and how things will work. And this is where applicants are going to provide a detailed roadmap for research and evaluation efforts. This should include describing the proposed research methodology and analysis, talk a little bit about your plans to work with grassroots organizations, and just any other types of roles, responsibilities, and timelines. Wanted to note that applicants are expected to provide a project management plan as well as a logic model as part of their application. So again, you'll be touching on a lot of the kind of core approach and details of implementation within that project design and implementation section of the application. But we are also asking you to provide supplementary documents that should be uploaded to the attachment section of the Egrants application. So we'll get to that a little bit when we get to the required attachment section, but just wanted to flag that there. They should hopefully sound similar and reference one another. So making sure that everything that you're inputting to Egrants, whether it's an attachment or a text field, all kind of lines up is super helpful for us. The next section is potential impact. So this is where you get a chance to make your case about the project's potential impact, and describe how the applicant would disseminate findings, lessons learned, again, all of those kinds of expectations that we covered earlier. The next section, again, definitely standard for us, a budget detail, really important as well. This should include an up to 24-month comprehensive budget, and each category of the budget, whether it's personnel or supplies and operating expenses, is going to have its own section, and you'll have the opportunity to provide a justification. So we really encourage folks to clearly and concisely describe in that text box kind of how each cost was determined or estimated, as well as why the cost is necessary for successful implementation of the project. And the budget should also address any key deliverables and activities of the project. So again, making sure you're cross-referencing with those project design and implementation and other sections of the application to make sure that everything lines up is a recommended best practice. So I mentioned required attachments. There's a couple of them that we wanted to flag for folks. And again, strongly encourage you, as the exclamation disclaimer text box below says, more information, more detail on all of this is in the written funding announcement. So definitely check that out and read it carefully. But the required attachments, there's several of them. The first is to upload any resumes or CVs of key personnel who are listed as contributing to your project. That could include folks who are part of the applicant's organization or any partners or consultants who will be part of those efforts. We're also asking for letters of support, commitment, or similar documentation for all of the named project partners. So just really wanting to make sure that if you reference someone in your application, they know that you reference them and they're good with it. Again, pretty standard fare for most applications. I mentioned these two next documents already, but the project management plan, this is really an important document. Again, it should echo what you spell out in your project design and implementation section, but this is where you'll articulate key project milestones, timelines, and responsibilities, who is doing what and when. And then the second document is a logic model. So this is really to further illustrate how the proposed project design can result in specific and measurable outcomes. So that is the kind of application 101. Again, a lot more detail in the written funding announcement. So just, strongly encourage you to check that out. I am going to turn things over to my colleague, Chris, who's going to talk briefly about signature page requirements.
Thank you, Sam, and good afternoon again, everyone. When you submit your application, the one document that has to be signed and submitted with your application is a signature page, and you'll see on your screen there that is a PCCD signature page. I know there are a lot of lines on that page, but you'll notice there are two highlighted areas. You'll notice on the right side, that is where the authorized signatory should sign. An authorized signatory is someone who has documented authority to sign contracts on behalf of your organization. Most of the time, or a lot of times for a nonprofit, it's the president, vice president of the board of directors. You'll notice on the left side, that is where the attesting officer signs, and that person is basically attesting to the authenticity of the signatory that's signed on the right side of the page. Typically for a nonprofit organization, this is the treasurer, secretary, or the board of directors. This page is uploaded during application submission, and you can upload it at any time to the main summary section of your application. Anytime you're working on the application prior to submission, it can be uploaded. There is also a help guide on our website to help with document uploads such as this, and then later on, if you are successful, an award letter would also have to be uploaded in the same manner. And with that, I think that's it for signature pages. I'm going to pass it back to Sam.
Thanks, Chris, for covering the ever popular topic of signature pages. I know that can sometimes be a little tricky. There are a lot of lines on there. All right, so let's talk about timeframes. So as you can see here, this is kind of a roadmap for where we've been, where we're heading. So as we mentioned before, funding announcement opened January 17th, 2023, just a couple of weeks ago. Today, we're having a webinar for applicants. That's February 8th. Hard to believe we're already a couple days into February somehow. But applications, as we mentioned before, due on March 30th, 2023. May 31st, 2023 is the anticipated date for selection and the announcement of that selection at the School Safety and Security Committee meeting. So what will happen in between is a review of the applications that were submitted by March 30th, but that's the date when that recommendation will be publicly presented to the committee for consideration. We'll then anticipate that the start date, as we mentioned before, is going to be July 1 of this year. And then June 30th, 2025 is the end date for the project. So again, 24 months, all things being said. And with that, I'm going to pass things back over to Chris to talk a little bit about our funding process.
Thanks again, Sam. As you see on your screen, there are a few notable items I'd like to provide you information on regarding how PCCD funding works. First, PCCD grants are paid on a reimbursement basis. Basically, grantees spend the money on approved project costs and then request reimbursement from PCCD. That reimbursement is triggered by the submission of required fiscal and program reports in our Egrants system. Those fiscal and program reports are required on a quarterly basis. However, we do provide the opportunity to submit fiscal reports more frequently than quarterly, such as monthly, if current cash flow needs of your organization would require a more frequent reimbursement model. Reimbursement may only be claimed for actual project expenses as approved in the final grant application budget, and our fiscal report template requires grantees to report expenditures at the line item detail level of their approved budget. Another reminder is as you're completing your application, please be aware that generally PCCD grant funds are designed to support the direct program-related implementation costs related to your proposal, and our funds are meant to supplement your agency's existing resources in order to implement your proposed project. Sam, go to the next slide. Thank you. And just finally, a few other friendly reminders. As Heather discussed earlier in the presentation, first step is to register your agency and all appropriate users in eGrants and make sure those users have the appropriate roles. Registered users and identified contacts will receive automated communication from eGrants regarding your application. Next, you want to make sure your agency is registered as a vendor in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's vendor management system. PCCD would not be able to make grant payments to your organization until your organization has a vendor number and has set up the correct banking information within that vendor account. All of our grant payments are electronic ACH payments made to the bank account identified in the appropriate vendor account. And finally, in order to award a grant to your organization, you have to have a unique entity identifier, or UEI, issued by the federal government. UEI is the primary means of entity identification for the federal government, and all direct federal grant recipients and first-tier subrecipients are required to have one of those nifty identifiers. If your organization does not have a UEI, you can go to sam.gov for more information and to register. And with that, back to you, Sam.
Thanks, Chris. I think that's the first time I've heard UEI described as nifty. I like it. So we've officially entered into the Q&A sort of phase of our presentation here. So we really want to know what questions we can answer for you. A couple of you have already submitted some questions in the Q&A feature of the live event platform. Thank you. If you haven't and you have a burning question, please feel free to type that now. Today's webinar is a really good opportunity to ask any clarifying questions that you might have about the funding announcement, so that you can prepare an application that's responsive and informed. Please rest assured we're going to take all of these questions that we get today, and whether we're able to verbally provide a response or not, we will attempt to address them in writing through our written Q&A response section of the funding announcement Q&A webpage, as you can see there. If you have questions that come up after this webinar session, maybe as you're a little further on in preparing your application, please feel free to email PCCD staff at the email address that you can see there, ra-pccd_executive-ofc@pa.gov. Just want to really kind of highlight here that both for today's webinar and also for that email address, we're really only able to answer things that would clarify kind of the intent of the funding announcement and some of the requirements. We won't be able to provide any direction given the competitive nature of this solicitation on things like specific program ideas or project activities or things like that. So with that caveat and sort of aside, we really do encourage you to reach out. The worst that happens is we tell you we can't answer it, so it's better to kind of ask the question than to sort of leave it burning and keeping it curious. So we do encourage folks to check the online Q&A page before you ask a question. So always encourage you to ask it, but definitely double check to see if somebody has already asked it before. And we also really recommend reading the online Q&A page before you submit your application, because it is always possible that somebody asked a question that maybe you didn't know that you needed the answer to, and it might affect kind of how you structure your application. So that's sort of the skinny on how to ask questions. Again, we encourage you to do so today. And with that, we're going to move on over to the Q&A feature. So I'm actually going to pass to my colleague Zoe to facilitate the Q&A portion based on what's come in so far. So Zoe, I'll pass the mic to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start with some of the questions that came in at the beginning, because these sound like to me a little bit more general. So the first question is, have the 5 CVI grantees already proposed an evaluation strategy? Or is it the expectation that the evaluation grantee will develop an evaluation strategy with each CVI? And another part of that question is there an expectation that this would be a single evaluation framework, including all 5, or 5 separate and distinct evaluations? And I believe that will go to you, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to answer that. It's a good question. So the answer is that the CVI pilot sites, the 5 of them, have not been asked to or have been expected to develop their own evaluation strategy. In fact, that funding announcement explicitly informed those applicants that PCCD would be selecting a VIP grants evaluation partner to facilitate and do that work with and for them. And so the expectation for that would really be to do a combination site-specific and cross-site evaluation of those pilot sites. And again, we'll be working closely with whoever's the selected applicant for the evaluation grant, as well as with our technical assistance partner to really connect the VIP evaluation provider to those sites and sort of come up with a game plan from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Another question that was related to that is, will the applicants have access to the 5 CVI grantees approved application, or are they publicly available?
Yeah, so we have publicly available project summaries. So that'll be on the Gun Violence Grants and Funding website that we mentioned earlier. But we would absolutely, as I mentioned before, be willing and able to connect the recommended applicant with all of those sites and also provide additional application information as part of the onboarding process. So no worries there.
Awesome. And a couple more related to that, about how many VIP recipients should be included in the subset? More like 5, more like 30, or totally up to the applicant?
Yeah, so this is sort of one of those ones where we'd like it to be, I think, a substantial subset, but we also recognize, as we mentioned before, there's a huge number of projects funded there. So we're really leaving it to the applicant to kind of describe their proposed approach and rationale. So, take a look definitely at all the projects that have been funded before. And the criteria in the funding announcement, and whatever proposed approach you think makes the most sense given the funding announcement criteria and kind of your sort of thinking or best thinking on the approach for that. It is an area of discretion for the applicant to kind of make their case on how they see this going in terms of that subset.
Awesome, Sam. Thank you. That's a really helpful response. And another question we have is, can an organization submit more than one application or project design?
Yeah, so I generally speaking, and maybe I'll ask for Chris to kind of piggyback on this one. Generally speaking, we tend to ask folks to only submit one. We do recognize that in some cases, like large institutions, there may be multiple departments or separate units that may be interested in all submitting or both submitting an application. So I would say, if you're a single entity, we're really looking for this to be kind of a one and done application for you, but we certainly recognize that for larger institutions, there may be other centers or departments that are affiliated with your institution who might be interested in coming in as well. We would certainly encourage you, if the latter is your situation, we would really encourage you to work with, to the extent possible, that other entity. We definitely want to make sure that left hand is talking to right if possible. So Chris, did I butcher any of that or anything you'd want to add to it?
No, I think you answered that really well.
Sweet. All right,
Awesome.
Zoe, what's next?
So it sounds like we have like one more kind of related to like the key deliverables. So this question is, the third bullet under key deliverables states conducting site visits / virtual meetings to interview key staff. Are these activities intended for the subset of projects from the competitive VIP grants or the CCVI strategies grants?
It is intended for both. So we're really looking for the recommended applicant to be ready and prepared to interact with grantees directly who are going to be part of the evaluation activity. So it's going to be all 5 CCVI sites, which we've mentioned before. And then the expectation would be that those types of interactions would also be built into however you're approaching the evaluation of the VIP cohort or subset that you propose.
Awesome. And then this next question is related to like limits in the application. So I know this can vary by question in the actual application in eGrants. And there's actually a little, I forget the icon that it is. My colleagues may be able to speak to it. If you put your cursor over that icon as you're completing your application in eGrants, it'll tell you how many characters are allowable for that particular question. So the question that I was responding to a little bit more generally was whether there was a page limit for the narrative. So I hope I answered that question. It does depend on the character limit by question, and you will be able to see that in eGrants.
Yeah, and I would just to add to that note that I don't believe we put page limits on the attachments that were required. And you will also see that in the funding announcement, there's the opportunity to provide additional attachments. So if you feel like you want to explain something further, again, Zoe's spot on in terms of those character limitations for the main application that will be scored and reviewed. But if you have any questions about any of that as you're navigating the eGrant system, if it's technical, our help desk will definitely be able to help you navigate that. I think in general, I want to say 5,000 characters is about average, but don't quote me. Use that icon thing that Zoe was talking about.
Just to add to that, I think the icon thing, to me at least, looks like a little hammer.
Thank you,
Huh.
Chris. I was like, what do I call that? It
Yeah.
is like gold-ish. So if you guys see
Yes.
something gold, you'll
And
be like, oh, that's a hammer. And
maybe a gavel.
yeah, gavel. Yeah, gavel. Thank you, Chris. That is helpful just so our potential applicants know what to look for as they're completing their application. The next question is related to incentives for the budget. So this can be either for Sam or Chris. One question is a little bit more general. Hey, can incentives be included for participants? And then the other was very similar, but it was for food as well as gift cards.
Sam, I'll take that and then I'll ask you to jump in and add to my answer if you feel it's necessary. I would just say generally incentives would be allowable. I'd say if you're planning for that type of expenditure, I would just say make sure it's reasonable, justified, and related to the project activities. That's kind of, I think, how we would look at that during our review. I'll stop there, Sam. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, and I was going to say, Chris, I want to pass this to you. So perfect. Great minds think alike. Nothing to add on that.
Awesome. And at this time, we have answered all of the questions that we've received.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for all those questions. Gonna sort of wrap up with a slide on additional information and resources. So wanted to call your attention again. We've referenced it a couple of times. The Gun Violence Grants and Funding webpage is a really good place to bookmark and check out. We will post the link to today's webinar there. It's also a place where we'll post the slides from today's session. Another really good place to check out is just around the funding announcement webpage, just funding resources in general. So a lot of the grant guides that were referenced, things like our applicants manual, you'll be able to get a lot more information and direction on some of those pieces using those different links. And then last but not least, the funding announcement Q&A webpage. Again, we'll be posting responses to the questions that came in today. If you have any questions that you want to email to us, we will be responding to you in writing and then posting responses to that Q&A page for everybody to be able to see. So if you want to ask us a question, just please note that we'll be responding to questions up through Tuesday, March 28th. So that's 2 days before the close of the solicitation. So I know if you're anything like me, I am a chronic procrastinator. So what I would strongly encourage you to do, and I don't know if it's possible with grant applications, but if you cannot wait until the very last minute to have a burning question, that would be really helpful. And as Heather mentioned, there are some parameters around our help desk for eGrants as well that you should be mindful of. So, again, looking forward to fielding any additional questions you guys have, looking forward to reading the applications that are submitted under the solicitation, and certainly looking forward to working with one of you on this new initiative. We're really excited about it. We think this will make a huge impact and definitely help us to grow this program that does really important work in a much needed space. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your interest, and hope you have a good rest of your day.